The 1960s were a transformative time that brought about significant cultural, social, and technological changes. For kids growing up in that era, certain experiences and aspects of daily life hold a special place in their memories, and life was vastly different from what children experience today. Let's take a look at 13 things from the 1960s that kids today will never understand. Number 13. Military draft. One thing about the 1960s that would shock young men and women today was the military draft during the Vietnam War. Back then, if you were 18, you might get drafted into the army to fight in one of the toughest wars ever. Some even sacrificed their lives. Imagine if there was a draft for today's youth. Though Americans still register with the Selective Service, thankfully, the draft hasn't been used since then. So, while young people today don't face the same pressures as those in the 1960s, it's important to remember the sacrifices made by previous generations. Number 12. Pregnancy practices in the 1960s. In the 1960s, pregnant women were less concerned with changing their habits. Unlike today, where mothers avoid caffeine, deli meat, and harmful substances. Back then, things were different. If a mother smoked or drank before becoming pregnant, she was likely to continue doing so during the pregnancy. It's because they were not aware of the risks, as we are now. Looking through old photographs, it's astonishing to see mothers smoking while pregnant. It demonstrates how much we've learned in ensuring baby safety. Today, we take extra precautions, doing everything we can to give our newborns the best start in life. Number 11. Analog clocks and winding watches. Imagine waking up every morning and putting on your wristwatch and winding it. Because battery-powered watches were new and uncommon at the time, most people had to wind them to keep track of time. Learning to read a clock was critical, because they often display Roman numbers or tick marks. Today, many kids are unable to read analog clocks because they have never had to. Times have changed, and digital clocks and cell phones now display time with numbers rather than hands. It's a reminder of how everyday tasks have evolved with the march of progress. Number 10. Walking to school. Back in the 1960s, walking to school was common. There was no carpooling, and kids then simply relied on your own 2 feet. Even as young as 6 years old, children were sent forth on their own to learn how to travel. Sometimes they would join up with siblings or neighbors on the same route, so kids weren't completely alone. Parents would hand kids their meals and send them on their way. Today, however, things are different. Fewer children walk, most ride the bus or are dropped off by their parents. Number 9. Candy store memories. Walking home from school was enjoyable since you could stop in a store for candy. With a little change, you could buy a large bag of candy. Sometimes you'd hang out and drink an ice cream soda or a malt. You could sit at the counter and drink like an adult. This taught kids to earn, count, and spend real money at a young age. Unfortunately, most children today rely on plastic credit cards to pay for purchases. They miss out on the practical experience of handling cash and appreciating its value. Number 8. Carrying school books in hands. Back in the 1960s, backpacks weren't around yet. So when kids went to school, they didn't have bags to carry their stuff. Instead, they held their school books in their hands or tucked them under their arms. Can you imagine lugging around heavy textbooks, folders, and papers like that? It wasn't easy. They walked to and from school with all these things in their sweaty hands, without the luxury of a bag to strap on their shoulders. It wasn't until the 1970s that backpacks became a thing. Number 7. Toys in the 1960s. During the 1960s, toys had some risks. Science experiment kits emitted harmful fumes, and plastic melting ovens were common. Kids quickly learned that some toys could be dangerous. For example, BB guns were popular, despite being considered toys. Today, toys with choking hazards are removed from shelves. But in the 1960s, kids were tougher. They didn't mind getting burns, scrapes, or scars. Instead, they saw them as badges of honor. So they played with these toys carefully, knowing the risks involved. It was a different time, and children were taught to be cautious but resilient when playing with their favorite toys. Number 6. The TV dinners. In the 1960s, when TV was still new, Swanson introduced the groundbreaking idea of eating dinner while watching TV. Their first TV dinners came in divided foil containers, heated up in the oven. These became a staple in family freezers nationwide. The novelty made Swanson TV dinners hugely popular, prompting other companies to offer their own versions. It was a hit, especially among working moms, becoming a fixture in middle-class American homes. This was the closest thing to having pre-prepared food delivered because there were no food delivery choices at the time. Imagine the convenience. Number 5. Unconventional food trends. Food was different back in the 1960s. Jell-O was more than simply a dessert. It was a whole meal. Mothers then would try anything with it, like ham, vegetables, and even fish. If you look through an old cookbook, you will see a lot of Jell-O molds. And if your mother had you finish your food before leaving the table, you could be stuck there for a while. So the 60s had some strange food ideas that might make today's young people feel a bit queasy. Number 4. Fondness for silly putty. Remember the joy kids felt when they cracked open the red egg containing silly putty. You could bounce or stretch it, and the excitement of using it on newsprint to create a replica of your favorite comics was priceless. They still sell silly putty, but relatively few houses have newspapers lying around. Kids today aren't reading comic strips. Therefore, silly putty's appeal isn't what it was in the 1960s. It serves as a reminder of how things change and how simple joys of the past may not be as appealing to this new generation. Number 3. Western childhood adventures. Growing up in the 1960s, Westerns were a big deal for boys. John Wayne ruled the silver screen, while Gunsmoke and Bonanza dominated TV. Bonanza was the first Western broadcast in color, making it extra special. Finding a neighbor with a color TV was a treat. If kids then weren't watching Bonanza, they'd be outside with their cowboy hats and cap guns. It's been a while since we have seen a kid playing with a cap gun, but back then, it was the norm. Those were the days when every youngster wanted to be a cowboy, living out our Wild West fantasies in the backyard. Number 2. Drive-in movie theaters. In the 1960s, watching movies was a different experience. We couldn't immediately access popular movies. We needed to wait for them. That's because downtown theaters often feature only 1 or 2 screens. The movies would be rotated out every week or two. There were no multiplexes that showed every recently released movie. Malls were still relatively new. However, drive-in theaters were famous in those days. They gave kids another option for catching a movie on the weekend. It was a slower pace, but it made the experience of going to the movies even more special. Number 1. Joy of first job. In the 1960s, landing your first job meant earning between $1 and $1.50 per hour. It was a significant achievement, allowing you to make more than simply pocket change by recycling cans and bottles. Getting a job meant more than just earning money. It was also about learning to be a responsible person. You had to be on time, wear a clean uniform, and work hard. These jobs gave the youngsters valuable lessons about responsibility and hard effort. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with more exciting content. Thanks for watching.